ことしたから出られないとかですかね。
There's a very specific kind of horror that doesn't scream at you. It doesn't rely on jump scares. It doesn't throw monsters into the frame every 30 seconds. Instead, it traps you somewhere familiar and quietly asks one terrifying question. What if you can't trust your own perception? That's the feeling I had the moment I started digging into Exit 8, a horror thriller that's finally heading to theaters across the United States after building serious momentum overseas. And if you haven't heard of it yet, that might actually work in its favor. Before we begin, would you please support me? Subscribing is free and very important to me. Please subscribe for better analysis and more videos. Directed by Genki Kawamura, Exit 8 premiered at the 2025 Cannes Film Festival and reportedly received an 8-minute standing ovation. That's not minor festival politeness. That's sustained applause. From there, it traveled across major festivals, including Toronto, where critics began describing it as one of the most immersive game adaptations in recent memory. Right now, the film holds a staggering 97% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. That alone puts it in rare territory for a horror movie, especially one adapted from a relatively small independent video game. And here's the interesting part. It's already proven itself commercially in Japan, earning $27 million domestically. For a contained psychological thriller with a minimalist premise, that's impressive. Now, Neon has confirmed that Exit 8 will release nationwide in the United States on April 6, 2026. That places it just days after major releases like the Super Mario Galaxy movie and A24 is the drama. On paper, that sounds like a risky window, but the audience overlap may not be what you expect. Because while some moviegoers will gravitate toward large-scale game adaptations, others are looking for something more unsettling, something that doesn't feel engineered for mass spectacle. Exit 8 is based on the Exit 8, a 2023 indie game created by Kotick Create. The premise sounds deceptively simple. A man finds himself trapped in an underground subway passage. His goal is straightforward: find Exit 8, but there are rules. Do not overlook anything unusual. If you spot an anomaly, turn back immediately. If you see nothing strange, continue forward. Miss a single detail, and you are sent back to the beginning. That structure may sound repetitive, but that repetition is exactly where the terror lives. The game was praised for transforming a sterile, ordinary corridor into a psychological minefield. The environment rarely changes dramatically. Instead, it shifts subtly. A poster slightly altered, a shadow misplaced, a face lingering too long. You begin doubting yourself. And that tension translates directly into the film adaptation. Kazunari Nanamiya stars as the unnamed protagonist, often referred to simply as the Lost Man. The supporting cast remains intentionally minimal. Yamato Kochi, Naru Asanuma, Kotoni Hannes, Nana Komatsu, but make no mistake, this is Ninomiya's movie. Genki Kawamura, who previously worked on films like Your Name, Mirai, and Belle, brings a different kind of pacing here. Those projects leaned into emotional animation and expansive storytelling. Exit 8 compresses everything into one location, one corridor, one looping nightmare. The official synopsis describes it clearly. A man is stranded in an endless sterile subway passage. To escape, he must follow strict instructions, observe everything, identify abnormalities, proceed carefully, but one oversight resets everything. It's such a simple hook that it becomes terrifying, because horror thrives on inevitability, and Exit 8 is built around inevitability. The film's trailer reveals an unsettling tone. The corridor is bright white, clinical, almost too clean. The repetition becomes suffocating. The same passerby appears again and again, the same lighting, the same footsteps, until something changes, and when it does, it's subtle. That subtlety is what makes this adaptation fascinating. Many video game films struggle because they attempt to replicate gameplay mechanics visually without understanding the emotional core behind them. Exit 8 appears to understand the core. Critics at TIFF noted how effectively the film captures the feeling of participation. Rather than passively watching a character solve puzzles, viewers feel like they are scanning the corridor themselves. That is not easy to achieve in cinema. Zachary Lee described the experience as frighteningly immersive. He highlighted how Kawamura uses repetition not as filler, but as a pressure-building device. Each cycle tightens the psychological screws. Not everyone is entirely sold, though. While critics sit at 97%, audience reactions currently hover around 73%. That gap suggests something important. This might not be a crowd-pleasing horror film. It might be a thinking person's horror film. Described it as occasionally losing itself in chaos, weighed down by a slow-moving narrative. That criticism tells me something. This is not a traditional horror structure with escalating violence or frequent narrative pivots. It's deliberate, it lingers, and that style won't work for everyone. But here's the bigger picture. 2026 is shaping up to be a massive year for video game adaptations. The Super Mario Galaxy movie, Mortal Kombat 2, a new Resident Evil reboot, all large-scale productions with recognizable brands. Exit 8 stands apart. It is smaller, more contained, more experimental, and sometimes those are the adaptations that surprise us. Neon has built a reputation for curating daring releases. In 2025 alone, they distributed Sentimental Value, The Secret Agent, No Other Choice, It Was Just an Accident, and Arco. Several of those titles are already circling early Oscar conversations. They recently acquired Leviticus from Sundance, another horror entry that could land in 2026. That tells me Neon believes in horror that leans psychological rather than purely commercial, and Exit 8 fits that identity perfectly. The real question is how American audiences will respond. Will viewers embrace a minimalist horror concept that demands attention to detail? Or will they expect louder spectacle? Because Exit 8 requires engagement. It invites you to watch closely, to question what you're seeing, to doubt your instincts. And honestly, that's refreshing. In a year filled with big IP adaptations, Exit 8 feels like a reminder that horror doesn't need scale to work. It needs tension. It needs atmosphere. It needs discipline. If Kawamura's direction holds steady, this could become one of the most critically acclaimed game adaptations of the year. But it may also become one of the most divisive. And sometimes, divisive is more interesting than safe. Exit 8 hits theaters April 6, 2026. And if you're the kind of horror fan who appreciates subtle dread over explosive chaos, this might already be on your radar. The corridor is waiting. The only question is whether you'll notice what changes. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. This is where these kinds of films come to life. Until the next story, stay curious, be critical, keep your eyes on the screen, and remember, every film you haven't seen is a new film.